everyone. Thanks a lot for making time in your busy calendars for this webinar. My name is David Delcer. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at BFA Global. And today I'm very, very excited to unveil the results of months of work, of intense and collaborative work, exploring the intersection of digital finance and climate change. But before I go into any details, I just wanted to give you a bit of context. Since you're joining this webinar on your own will, right? You probably don't need any convincing that climate change is happening for real and will be a major disruptor for the financial health of communities globally, right? The UN's Race to Resilience team has estimated that around 4 billion people are vulnerable to climate change, and that we need to reach those individuals with resilient solutions by 2030 to avoid the worst, right? But if we take a step back and look at those numbers, that's about half of humanity or so, and we only have 8 years to get there. So that's a pretty ambitious bar, right? So the question that we've been grappling with is, what can digital finance do to make a difference in that race? Or in other words, how do we build a bridge between the two sectors of financial inclusion, economic development, and also the climate action sector, right? So that sounds like a very important mission, something very worthwhile doing. You would imagine that for such a high-level important question, it would have already received lots of interest, right? And there would be already lots of answers. But up until today, there was very little written, at least available online, about this intersection. And even more worrying, it's really hard to find innovators that are working in showing us and themselves what today's digital technologies and business models can do to further this goal, right? So as we were looking through this, it became pretty clear that we needed to launch a whole ecosystem of innovation now as in 2021, so we can actually move the needle by 2030, because anything you start takes years to grow, right? So as a first step into that, and with PayPal's financial and intellectual support, we formed a task force that would explore this intersection, and we'll also start planting ecosystem seeds, if you wish. And today we're unveiling the results of that exploration, which you can find on our website, which I think we'll share on the chat group. Essentially, the process looked like a massive exercise at crowdsourcing wisdom. We talked to over 50 organizations and experts that share back with us what they know, what they have learned. And with that input, we've produced a number of the pieces, right? We have now a map of solutions, a brief with 8 investment theses, and of course, the framework for action that we're unveiling today that offers concrete actions to stimulate, concrete ideas to stimulate action and help these ecosystems sprout. You can find all of that on the website. I very much encourage you to check it out. And through this process, we've been very happy and very encouraged also by the support from this wide group of organizations. It feels like this is clearly an area that is ripe for deeper work and closer collaboration. So in a moment, you'll hear from the task force members how they see this intersection, what they've learned, how different stakeholders can move forward. And I just wanted to, of course, thank the task force for making it all possible, and thank all of you in the audience, both for your time and attention today and for any help you might have provided the process with. And now I will just let us go into the actual substance of the event that my colleague Jacob is going to guide us through. Thank you very much. On to you, Jacob.
Thanks, David. Great. So I'll just quickly, follow up David's introduction. We're all really here because we know climate change is one of the biggest challenges we're going to face in our lifetime, and we need to both reduce emissions but also address the consequences of the changing climate on the most vulnerable, particularly those that are unequipped with the tools to respond. And really, in the short run, these populations are the most exposed to climate risks because they are more likely to rely on the physical environment for their livelihoods and for food. They're more likely to live in climate disaster-prone areas and have more of their wealth in physical assets that are prone to destruction during climate disasters or extreme weather. And these are also the populations that are most likely to be excluded from formal financial services and may not have access to social or financial safety nets. And the good news is that there are solutions that can help the vulnerable populations we're describing better anticipate and prepare for climate risks, and also help them respond and help them to bounce back from shocks when they do happen. But as David was mentioning, these solutions are not really reaching them fast enough. And what we came together, the hypothesis we came together around was that digital finance can really address a lot of the barriers to the affordability, to access, to usage of climate resilience products, and really act as a critical enabler of scale and depth of impact. And really what we came to a realization early in this process is that these solutions don't really exist at scale because the whole innovation ecosystem that's needed to fund, to support, to develop these solutions is just not there. And so the core of the work that we've been doing with this task force that we'll describe and that we'll present has been to try to catalyze this ecosystem. So what we've done in the last 6 months is that we launched this process at Earth Day. And this is kind of a quick summary of the activities we've undertaken in just a short 6-month period. We brought together a task force, and we've held a series of closed door roundtables. We've consulted another 50 plus organizations, and really throughout the process, what we were trying to do is answer a couple of questions. First, what could we take away as lessons from other adjacent ecosystems? And we looked closely at microfinance, fintech, and pay-as-you-go solar for insights. What can we take from the early stages of those ecosystems and apply here to really move the needle? And then based on that analysis, what do we, as this emerging space, think are the most critical interventions and knowledge products needed to really move the needle from ideas to action in this new ecosystem? And then finally, how can we deliver those outputs and coordinate and accelerate this new ecosystem? So 6 months is a pretty short period of time, but we've made a lot of progress, and this is kind of my quick chance to again thank the task force members and everybody else that's really helped us in this process. So now I'll transition over to the actual outputs of this work. So one of the first things we heard pretty loud and clear from this process, that the ecosystem would really need 3 deliverables to help us move forward. The first was to set some ambitious objectives for 2030 that can act as kind of a North Star for this ecosystem. And what you'll see on the left side of this slide is where we've landed. We believe there's an opportunity to reach over 1 billion people with climate resilient solutions that are enabled by digital finance. And then at that level of maturity, the industry would be taking in about 25 billion in capital each year. So that's sort of the North Star in terms of target outcomes. And then the second thing we did was we heard that organizations were developing their strategies. They were thinking about where to deploy money, where to focus, and they really wanted to have recommended key actions that they can take. And so that's what we've done. We put together some cross-cutting initiatives and recommended key actions that can be taken by 5 different actor groups. So Innovators, which is a term we're using to describe the types of organizations that are developing and bringing to market resilient solutions. and then Catalytic Funders, who are helping to spark and de-risk some of those innovations. Investors is a group that is a term we're using to describe organizations that are funding the growth and the longer term impact of those solutions. Enabling organizations are those that are addressing knowledge gaps and building partnerships and supporting efforts like this framework for action. And then finally, governments and policymakers. And we'll spend some more time looking specifically at the recommendations for each of these actor groups in just a few minutes. And then the third thing that we heard was, because we are early on in this journey as an ecosystem, we heard a pretty strong demand for a set of foundational knowledge products to help define this space and really start to spark some action. And in the last 6 months, we've published a solutions map, and as David mentioned, an investment brief that outlines areas that are ready for investment within the space. And then we're also publishing some terminology and insights from a set of innovators that we've been working with this year, as well as research that we've conducted with climate vulnerable populations over the course of this year. And so those three components together are what we're calling a framework for action for this sector. And then yesterday, I'm happy to announce that we launched a beautiful web interactive that pulls together all of this content in one place. And hopefully someone in the chat has shared the URL for that. But I'll actually stop sharing just for a sec so that I can just show you that website because it looks great. So it's at DF4, the number 4, CR.org. So Digital Finance for Climate Resilience.org. And really a lot of the content that I was just describing is you can find on this website. The target outcomes for the sector, a description of the populations that we're trying to impact. In the middle here, this is a really great visualization of the solution landscape that we've published. And there's a few areas that you can click into and reveals additional information. We also have a map of innovators that have digital finance for climate resilience solutions in market. And we're also looking to add to this. So if you're aware of any organizations that you'd like to add to this, please do get in touch with us. But this is a way for you to get a better understanding of not just what are these solutions we're talking about, but what are some examples of business models. We also have a little bit of information about the populations we're trying to reach, as well as a story of the ecosystem evolution research that I mentioned previously. And then, of course, the bulk of the content is focused on barriers, actions, and outcomes for those 5 stakeholder groups. So you see government and policymakers here. And if you clicked on Learn More, it would open up another page that would give you the chance to download a PDF. So I'll just return back to the slides. I thought it would be useful to just spend a second to show that website. And again, it's df4cr.org. Great. So what we'll do now is we'll spend the next 15 minutes or so really focused on those recommendations for each key actor group. And I'll just mention here that on these slides, to keep things simple, we've really just focused on the top 1 or 2 recommendations. And so please do visit the website because we have a lot more information there and additional recommendations for each actor group. But just to keep things simple, we've decided to focus on a quick summary here. And I'm happy to hand it over to members of our task force to present this. And so each member of the task force will present the perspective of one of these actor groups. So it's not necessarily that the task force member represents that group, but they'll present a perspective. And I would just ask that if each task force member could also please introduce yourself and your organization, and really what got you interested in this space. So I can start with Innovators, and I can mute my microphone, and Christina, if you could jump in here.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jacob. My name is Christina Rumbitis Del Rio, and I'm a senior adaptation and resilience advisor at the World Resources Institute. And I must say, it's been an absolute pleasure working with BFA Global and the team as part of the task force. And really kudos go to my colleague, Tyler Ferdinand, who was our core focal point to the task force. I'm here to speak on innovators and the solutions that we want to see innovators bring forward to reach the ambitious outcomes that Jacob just articulated. And one of the key challenges is the lack of really clear, strong business models for how climate resilient solutions benefit vulnerable people. There aren't the success stories. There isn't that M-Pesa story going back to digital finance that captures the imagination, that shows promise, that shows impact, that drives then further innovation and investment. And so part of what we want to see, and one key recommendation, is to integrate climate resilience into existing business models that are already out there and are already reaching low income and climate vulnerable populations. So instead of trying to integrate finance into resilience business models, of which there are few, we want to integrate climate resilience products, services, technologies. It can be early warning systems, climate information, access to products and services that build resilience for farmers, for urban dwellers, integrate those into the existing solutions that are already reaching a population that we want to serve in terms of climate vulnerable people. And so what we want to see in 2 years from now is that M-Pesa, that success story, more than one, where we can point to and see this is delivering impact. This is what needs to be scaled up. This is what needs to be further innovated and contextualized across the globe to reach the scale of ambition that we want to reach. And I'll say my interest in this solution set for adaptation and resilience is the dynamism and the potential impact that we're seeing. 10 years ago, I would have been less encouraged, but now I see the digital revolution reaching some of the poorest communities in the world. And through COVID and lockdowns, we've seen how people have maintained connections, how people have maintained market linkages, have maintained access to information using digital technology and finance. And so I think it's just a tremendous platform for impact and particularly reaching democratically the least, the most vulnerable populations who often have least decision-making power over how they adapt. And so I'll turn it over to the next speaker to take us through further recommendations.
Thanks so much, Christina. Great, so now we'll discuss catalytic funders. Claudia, can you jump in?
Sure, thanks, Jacob, and hi, everyone. My name is Claudia McKay, and I lead work at CGAP around digital rails. CGAP is an independent think tank. We are housed in the World Bank, focused on financial inclusion, and we work with catalytic funders along with providers, policymakers, lots of other key stakeholders to develop and test solutions around financial services so that poor people, especially women, can access and use financial services that are relevant to their daily lives. We're interested in this topic because in terms of topics that are going to impact the lives of poor people, unfortunately, climate change is near the top of the list. if not at the top. And so we are currently developing our strategy around climate change and financial services. And I'd really like to thank BFA for inviting us to be part of this task force. It came at the right time as we were developing the strategy. And so it's been super useful doing this alongside our own internal work and kind of coming up with our agenda on the topic. And it's been super interesting. Now, although we're not really a catalytic funder ourselves, we are actually a member organization of about 30 members who are themselves catalytic funders. So the perspective of catalytic funders is one that's very important to us. And what we've seen as a task force is that I think the good news is that climate change is increasingly a really high priority for many of these funders. However, the bad news is that oftentimes this funding is really siloed. And it's oftentimes put into sectors that have the kind of most obvious connection to climate change. So it might be energy or transportation or agriculture. And it's all well and good that climate, is incorporated into those strategies. But obviously, the silos is going to lead to very narrow solutions. And if you think from the perspective of a poor person who is impacted by climate, this narrow solution is not going to be enough because that climactic event is going to impact many areas of her life, not just how she accesses electricity or gets her goods to the market. So in terms of proposed actions, we feel that there needs to be more work to identify and address barriers in the market system. This also includes a lot of foundational understanding, which BFA has helped to kick off, but we need a lot more to really understand how low-income people are navigating climate change and how financial services can really make a difference and help people with that transition. There also needs to be more de-risking capital to really spur innovation. We need to just try lots of new ideas, develop new products, test different business models, and see what works. And we need to do this pretty quickly. So our hope, our expectation, the outcome in 24 months would be that we will see a significant injection of funding into the ecosystem. And now CGAP is really prepared to work with our members and other funders, and we really want to see a step change in the number of funders who have been able to incorporate a climate lens into their financial inclusion strategies so that this kind of funding is possible. And ideally, it would not just be in their financial inclusion strategies, but holistically across their organizations. But we really look forward to working with our members and other funders to help make that happen. And over back to you, Jacob.
Thanks, Claudia. Great. So now we'll focus on investors. I'll hand it over to Jackson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jackson Love. I lead the global environmental sustainability work for PayPal. For those of you who may not know PayPal, we are a digital financial services provider, and we're dedicated to ensuring that everyone has access to affordable, convenient, secure products and services to take control of their financial lives. I am part of the global social innovation team at PayPal, which is dedicated to driving environmental and social impact through PayPal's business. And importantly, we believe that financial health is central to enabling an inclusive and equitable global climate transition, very much aligned with the work that this task force has brought together. And I would also observe that financial health and climate resilience are important drivers for achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so I think my co-panelists here, the task force members would agree, but at PayPal, we recognize that there is this extraordinary opportunity for financial services to enable those who are most vulnerable to climate change, those who have the fewest means, to adapt and build resilience. And these digital finance innovations really can make this possible. So I was asked to represent the investor perspective here. PayPal very much has investing and venture activities. I will preface this by saying that I myself am not an investment professional, but I have had the opportunity through this work to learn from impact and early stage investors. So let me focus for a moment on what we heard from investors in developing this framework. First, to address barriers, it's very clear that to date, no evidence-based resources have existed to inform investment flowing into this space. There was no impact narrative, no standard taxonomy of terms. There was a clear awareness that digital finance could in some way help address climate resilience, but no investment theses or mapping of the solution space. And so thanks to the work of this task force and the consultative process over the past 6 months, we now have a digital finance for climate resilience investment brief that identifies 8 investment theses for impact investors, venture capitalists, angels, DFIs, private equity, and other investors to guide efforts in identifying, screening, investing in, and providing support to those startups and entrepreneurs working on these fintech solutions for climate resilience. So turning to actions, just to put it very briefly in the interest of time, digital finance for climate resilience knowledge products now exist. We need to find and invest in those innovators and investment vehicles working in this space. We need to share the learnings from those investments and find those climate resilience business models that Christina mentioned, and bring them forward as champions to demonstrate the proof of this space. And if we can do that, we think it's clear that the outcome will be proving these investments out in terms of finding product market fit and yielding financial returns. So like Claudia mentioned, demonstrating financial and social impact success will move us rapidly into the frenzy of excitement that we need to see for other investors and other investment vehicles to begin allocating capital at scale into this digital finance for climate resilience ecosystem. Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Jacob.
Thanks so much, Jackson. That was great. Great, and now I'll hand it over to Needy to speak about enabling organizations.
Thank you so much, Jacob, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone, wherever you're joining from. I'm delighted to be here today for this very, very important discussion at the right time. My name is Nidhi Upadhyay, and I am the lead for transformations under the Race to Resilience campaign. And I have been seconded into this UN campaign from the Atlantic Council's Adrian Nash Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. So the Race to Resilience, as some of you may or may not know, is a campaign with a goal to reach 4 billion people by 2030. It is a race that is aiming to catalyze a step change in global ambition for climate resilience, putting people and nature first in pursuit of a resilient world where we don't just survive climate shocks and stresses, but we thrive in spite of them. This includes making significant and innovative changes in the systems that we currently operate in. And these deep systemic changes that alter the structural conditions and processes are transformations, what I'm specifically representing and going to talk about. So my interest in the framework, or the Race to Resilience's interest in the framework, is the role it is playing in challenging a fintech ecosystem to make it better prepared for climate shocks and stresses for the most vulnerable communities. So this is something we are looking at for, in a Race to Resilience partner, delivering on transformations, and that is why DF4CR is a partner to the campaign. As the Race to Resilience team, our primary responsibility at this point is to bring together various partners that can work together to build resilience of communities and people and organizations across the world. The goal of doing this is so that we can collectively address the gaps in financing, tech innovations, capacity building, and other things that currently hinder the scaling of solutions specific to building climate resilience. So as you can see here mentioned on the slide under the framework for the barriers and proposed actions and the results, financing or donor appetite is clearly a barrier to addressing long-term ecosystem building efforts. So I think for the future or for the next 2 years, the key thing to do here is bring together a variety of stakeholders, whether that's nonprofit, civil society organizations, private organizations, funders, everyone together to work towards a solution and drive action, similar to the process that has happened for this particular framework, where there were consultations and people coming together to drive that action. So the next big step for everything is going to be come together, find a solution, and then drive it to action. Thank you. Over to you, Jacob.
Thanks, Nidhi. And finally, governments and policymakers. If I could hand it over to Camilo, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Camilo Tellez. I'm the head of the Digital Payments Innovation Hub at the Better Than Cash Alliance. First of all, I want to thank our colleagues at BFA and the rest of the members of the task force for the opportunity to participate today. And again, applaud the work that Jacob and David have done to bring us all together under this fantastic task force. So I'm here to represent the government perspective, and the Alliance is based at the United Nations. We're a partnership of 77 members, including governments, companies, and international development organizations that are really focused on accelerating the transition from cash to digital payments to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, digital payments, as we all know, are a proven solution to tackling many development challenges and accelerating progress towards the SDGs. And given the success of a lot of DFS innovations in reaching last mile populations, we see responsible green digital finance as having huge potential to help achieve, help overcome the damaging effects of climate change, particularly by building resilience and driving sustainable investments. So of course, this helps achieve SDG 13. In fact, according to a recent UNDP analysis, directing SDG investments in social protection, governance, digitization, and green economy over the next decade will be crucial to help avert the escalation of severe poverty and expedite global development compared to what's basically been observed before the pandemic. So in terms of the actual barriers, one of the main things that we see as underlined in the framework is actually, the challenges within the existing ecosystem is that climate and digital financial policy remain highly segregated. So there's currently only a few public-private collaborations that allow basically for climate resilience to happen through digital finance. And in terms of the actions, we see that it's really crucial for governments to invest in infrastructure needed to develop DF for CR. And by this, we don't just mean traditional infrastructure, such as mobile networks, digital payments infrastructure, but really important that we're looking also at shared digital infrastructure. There's a lot of really interesting work that is happening globally around digital public goods. And we hope that by investing in this infrastructure, it's gonna help governments tackle future crises better. And this is not just relevant in the context of climate change, but also in terms of other humanitarian crises. Another thing that perhaps actually is really important is that we think that in terms of outcomes over the 24 months, some of the above discussion action points really have the potential to enhance the number of forums and gatherings for innovators, funders, government officials, really to come together and focus on addressing some of the challenges around climate change. And hopefully through these gatherings of the various actors, there's going to be expanded investment and the catalyzing of further investment into the digital rails, into products, to be able to drive actually more movement in this area. One last point that I wanted to make is also from a government perspective, governments can lead by example. They've done fantastic work over the last decade to digitize G2P payments. But of course, these payments and its volumes are now, we have the opportunity to start targeting some of these programs to make sure that they're addressing the most crisis vulnerable populations and to really have climate at the center of its design. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Camilo, and thanks to everyone else as well for those great presentations. So I'll stop sharing my screen right now. And if I could ask the task force members to please turn on your video again. And now what we'll do is we'll spend about the next 20 minutes with Q&A with our task force. And I'll just, I saw it was mentioned in the chat window, but just to say out loud, please go ahead and post any questions you might have in that chat window. And if we do have some time towards the end, we can bring those up. So I'll maybe start with the digital finance and the climate change perspectives. And I'll start with Christina. So I understand that WRI is really traditionally focused on climate and environment. And so I was curious if you could maybe talk us through what made you interested in looking at, the role of digital finance in enabling climate resilient solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. I should say that I really come from the climate adaptation and resilience side of things. And I think our interest in this space really came out of work we were doing as part of the Global Commission on Adaptation, focusing on digital climate advisory services for farmers. And I'll put a link to that in the chat in a minute. But as part of this work, we were looking at how do we reach farmers, some of the most vulnerable, climate vulnerable farmers on Earth, with digital technology and information that would help them take more adaptive decisions. And I think two key insights came out of that work that made me really excited for this work in particular. First is just that digital technology is reaching some of the poorest farmers on Earth. They are routinely using cell phones and getting information through intermediaries that have access to cell phones, et cetera. And so there's been a tremendous growth of platforms for digital agriculture in particular. But the second was that the information alone isn't sufficient to enable the sorts of resilience actions that we want to see. So you might get an early warning system, alert about an oncoming threat, but if you don't have the resources or the ability to take action on that information, it's not very useful, is it? So an approach that a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs are starting to take is bundling of information services with access to finance. And that's where I saw this potential here, that instead of trying to bundle in climate services, bundle in finance with climate services, let's actually go the other way and work with the climate finance solutions that already work, and whether that's access to credit or access to insurance products, and then build in the climate information that helps farmers and others take more adaptive decisions. The other key insight came from a different piece of work under the Global Commission on Adaptation, which was on where climate finance is going, and who it's reaching and who, more importantly, who it's not reaching. And what we see from that is that it's not reaching frontline communities. It's not reaching the most vulnerable. And what I see in digital finance solutions for climate resilience is an opportunity to bypass the mechanics of very top-down funding mechanisms that depend on funding trickling down through national governments, departments, down to local level, and actually reaching the grassroots level more directly in a more targeted and probably more efficient way that enables individuals to make decisions about how they adapt and what they do to adapt. So those were the three sort of key avenues that really got me to this space. And of course, I don't know the digital finance space at all, which was why it was so great to work with a task force of different people with different skill sets to see what together we can take forward.
Thanks, Christina. So a question for Claudia. So CGAP, you talked about the diverse set of roles that the organization plays in the financial inclusion and digital finance worlds, and that you're, excuse me, in the process of developing, your strategy around climate. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you are seeing the role of financial services and digital finance in helping to address climate risks for low-income populations.
Sure. Well, to start off with, I'll say that I think we still lack a really deep understanding of the many ways in which climate change impacts the lives of low-income people. We're learning about this, but I think we still have a long way to go and how financial inclusion can be a tool for this. So for CGAP, trying to really deepen this understanding with a very strong focus on kind of individual and household level impact is going to be a major priority. What we do know is that to effectively manage climate shocks, people will need to protect themselves before the shock happens, cope with the shock as it's happening, and recover from the shock just after it happens. And ideally, aside from that, they would be thinking about longer term adaptation possibilities, including there might be some opportunities in other sectors for changing their livelihoods to one that will weather the climate transition better. So this is not something that is kind of a generic, this happens one time, how do we help people through this? This is a constant cycle of kind of going through these different stages of resilience. And we think that different financial products and services will really be needed at these different stages to help people navigate this. So just a couple of examples. In Nepal, Mercy Corps and Co-op Bank developed a product to allow people who received overseas remittances to put a portion of those aside into a pooled reserve fund that in the event of a climate shock, like a flood, could be used to manage that. So it's a great example of a product for helping people beforehand to prepare. Here in Kenya, a lot of households are dependent on livestock and they could purchase weather index insurance for livestock. And what we saw was that in climate events like a drought, households who had purchased that insurance were 25% less likely to reduce consumption. So that's a good example of a product for during or immediately after. Insurance is kind of a natural for that phase of that stage of kind of building resilience to climatic shocks. So CGAP is thinking about it in terms of these different stages and what might be needed, but there's a lot more evidence that is needed to really understand at each stage which financial products and services work for which types of customers. Just to say, digital is absolutely a part of this. I mean, digital enables affordability and accessibility and just the viability of business models to go into rural and remote areas. I saw Lisa's comment about data. Without digital, that wouldn't even be possible. You know, with digital, you also have the possibility of having data trails on smallholder farmers and other customers, which just opens up a whole new world of opportunities. So definitely we see a lot of opportunity, but a lot more work to really understand, develop, and test different products and solutions.
Thanks, Claudia. So Camilo, I have a question for you. So part of how we assembled this task force was that we were trying to bring together expertise in both climate and digital finance, right? Like trying to bring these two worlds together. But we also, looked at organizations that had a lot of experience in collaborative design of public good knowledge products, and then leveraging those to, continue to build momentum around those knowledge products and around those target outcomes. And one of the earliest resources that we looked at was the Principles for Responsible Digital Payments. That was one of the early inspirations for this work. And I know that you've gone on to continue to build off of that. And so I guess maybe what I'd love to hear a little bit more about is how BTCA has been able to build off of the initial launch of those principles, and what do you see as some of the potential lessons that we could take away here for continuing the momentum, after the launch of the framework for action, publication of these knowledge products.
Sure, thanks, Jacob. So the Alliance is a member-driven organization, and since 2016, when we initially launched the guidelines, as they were called at that point, there was a lot of discussion of how to ensure that whenever these guidelines were updated, they were going to be framed in the context that really met the needs of the various audiences of the Alliance. Now, one of the challenges that we have, it's great that we work with governments, companies, and international development organizations, but they also speak different languages. It's very different when you're having a conversation with the Ministry of Finance than when you're having a conversation with Unilever, which is one of our members, or Inditex, which is one of also of our members. So we really spent some time over the last couple of years just understanding each of those stakeholders and the needs that they had, crafting the right messaging and the right wording that would really address their needs. And I think that was the first guiding principle in terms of how to then design the update to what are now the UN principles for responsible digital payments. And we did this through a really consultative process. We really worked with our members. Part of this was through our advisory work and making sure that their insights, case studies were featured as good practices, making sure that, as we know, we can't generalize things. All the governments, all the country contexts are different, so everything needs to be contextualized, but really trying to highlight what these good practices basically were. I think one other thing that is important in the context of the responsible principles is that we really were building on some of the learnings, for example, from some of the humanitarian work that we have seen, where investing in the digital payments infrastructure can actually help countries respond better to crisis. We saw this in the context of Sierra Leone, for example, during the Ebola crisis 5-6 years ago. We saw it this time around during the pandemic in the context of COVID-19, with countries like Colombia that leveraged their digital payments infrastructure to quickly design, disperse payments, emergency payments to the people that needed them. And we're hoping that by continuing to work on this digital payments and public infrastructure, countries will be able to respond more effectively in the future for climate risk mitigation. Now, when it comes to another really important point is how have we also leveraged the launch of the principles? We've been working very closely with all our UN partners. The principles were launched with the support of the heads of UNDP, WFP, UNHCR, FAO, and as well in close collaboration with our government partners, including the governor of the Central Bank of the Philippines, senators from Pakistan. Many of our government members really have now basically rallied around the agenda for responsible digitalization. So where I think this is really important is that, in the future for the task force, it's really important to look precisely at all these different stakeholders, make sure that we are collecting evidence that is going to help them drive the right decisions, catalyze the right investment, to be able to then to take this agenda forward.
Thanks, Camila. And I guess building off of that, really focusing on momentum, I have a question for Nidhi. So COP26 is a topic that's on everyone's mind right now. And so I was curious if maybe you could give us a little bit of your perspective on what you think we need to do in the next couple of months so that we don't lose momentum after COP26. And I guess also, what are some of the things that we really should focus on achieving in, I guess, the year following that, so that we are going to COP27 with really meaningful action that's already happened, but even more organizations and commitments at the table than what we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, I think there are a few areas that I definitely think we all need to focus on, starting from this COP, leading all the way up to the next COP, and then beyond, because it's not, you can't time box it. You have to continuously keep working at it. So I think the first thing I have to put out there is action. We need to continue acting on the solutions that all of us here are developing that will create impact across the globe. So we start here, we start with some places, and then we have to scale. We have to continuously scale by acting on the solutions that we are developing. So for example, for the next year, aiming to have the adoption and application of this framework by private companies, by policymakers, public commitments of this framework would be a good goal to have just in the next 12 months. But that could then lead into having more cohorts, second, third layers of groups that we all can bring together to adopt this framework and scale it across communities. Another key area that I think that we all need to focus on is finance mobilization for resilience, because as I said earlier as well, funders, donor appetite, that needs to be addressed because there is limited financing for climate resilience, and that is what we need to unlock, if I can put it that way. So the framework offers a goal, and we have to either, just double that or triple that and keep growing it till we reach that, at least from my perspective, the 4 billion goal. Next, and just my last 2 points, but there are innovative solutions out there. What we have done here in this framework is bring together a variety of experts to talk about those solutions and see how we can all work together and take that forward. So I think scaling of innovative solutions that are already out there and bringing them together is key. And lastly, capacity building. If the way we currently operate in needs to change, if systems need to change, then we need to prepare our communities, we need to prepare our organizations and governments for that change. And I think just to close my point here, I think it's important to say that COP26 is the beginning of everything. COP27 is the continuation of what we start here, and it'll go beyond that because 2030 and beyond is the goal. So November 12th COP ends, and November 15th, the Race to Resilience campaign and all our partners are going to be back at it again, continuing to implement action. So thank you.
Thanks, Nidhi. So now I'll turn it over to Jackson. So Jackson, maybe just start with, I would love to hear, how is PayPal planning to take action on this framework?
Great, thanks, Jacob. And I wanted to just circle back and underscore something that I heard Camilo say, because this is something that we also have been thinking about in ways that we can partner with governments. And the point about the opportunity for governments to support the emergence of rapid response payments in response to climate shocks. I think that's a ripe area for financial service providers, digital finance, and governments to work together to respond when these climate shocks happen more frequently and more severely. And I also want to just take the opportunity to say this in the interest of time, since I'm watching the clock, just want to express a deep debt of gratitude to this esteemed panel of experts, my co-task force members and co-creators of this Digital Finance for Climate Resilience Framework for Action. Thank you all for lending your time, your intellectual capital, and your network to bring to life this incredibly important set of public knowledge products. And so just to echo what Nidhi's call to action here a moment ago, as far as PayPal is concerned, this framework is a keystone knowledge resource to inform PayPal's strategy for addressing climate justice and resilience, both within our own organization and for the benefit of all of our stakeholders. And to that point, we've taken the step over the summer to become a supporter of the Catalyst Fund, which is an investment, a startup accelerator that's really focusing now on this digital finance for climate resilience solution space, and has already identified a number of startups that are working on these business models, and we'll be starting a new cohort of investment opportunities moving through to demonstrate these solutions. So we hope that this framework itself and the consultative process that led to the framework's creation will help to maintain and support the expansion of this new innovation ecosystem at the intersection of digital finance and climate resilience, and that all of the stakeholder groups that we've identified here today have the opportunity to come in and help scale this ecosystem. Thank you, Jacob. I'll turn it back to you, and I'm sure we are about to wrap up here.
Thanks so much, Jackson. That was great. So I'll hand it over actually to David to close us out.
I had my prepared closing remarks, but I think Nidhi's and Jackson's were very phenomenal, very inspiring. So I hope I don't disappoint too much. First of all, thanks to everyone on the panel, of course, for as Jackson, you were saying, for all your ideas, all your feedback, all the content that has gone into this blueprint for us all to hopefully rally together, right? In particular, I was really blown away by that slide that we had on the milestones per month, because we've actually acted as if we were working on a global emergency, as climate change actually is, right? So that has been great. We've proven the task force with these superstars has proven that we can deliver results against a tight timeline and across organizations, which I think we're going to need more of going forward. And now we need to sustain this velocity as we go forward. And as Jackson was saying, as we start scaling the ecosystem, we have very ambitious goals and we have only 8 more years to go. And 8 years is essentially 2 World Cups or 2 Olympic cycles, right? It's not that much if you think about it. So in the short term, what sort of next steps can we take? Well, I'll encourage everybody to sort of keep learning from each other. We are going to be hosting 2 events at COP26 and 1 at Financial Inclusion Week. I know Nidhi and the R2R team are hosting a long list of events that I would encourage everybody to go check out. All of those links are on our website, and you can also use that website as well as a repository for new content, new events going forward. And we'd love to hear from events and content that the audience also produces. Again, this is an ecosystem. It's not just us. We don't want to play a director role or anything, right? So please share where you're up to and let's see if we can cross-fertilize. Also, if we take a little step back at what we have achieved, actually, it's been a lot of progress in these few months. It's been very intense. Some of us haven't slept so well, but it's been definitely worth it. And now we have a much clearer sense of what fintech can deliver in this space. We have a clearer sense of what the mission for this digital finance for climate resilience ecosystem could be, right? As Nidhi was saying, this effort is also now one of the Race to Resilience partners as a transformation. And above all, I think most importantly, what we have now is an engaged community with very engaged, very diverse, all types of players from big, small organizations. So we really hope we can all sort of move together quickly towards concerted action and sort of take this ecosystem that perhaps these past few months we've planted a big seed. Now we need to start seeing seedlings come out and grow and hopefully blossom and fruit, right? And I made a resolution this year that to stop using military metaphors like cohorts and shift to nature-based metaphors in the interest of our children. But anyway, what do we need for this ecosystem to sprout, right? Other than that clear mission that we were saying, we need talent, we need ideas, and we need funding. I think talent is, we're gonna have an embarrassment of options. So many people want to get engaged and tackle this generational challenge, right? So there will be no shortage of talent. Ideas, we're starting to produce. You've seen, if you look at the deliverables from this task force, there's already quite a few of them that could start being tested out, right? And then we need more funding. We're still short of patient capital that can fund this experimentation, that can fund this talent to check these ideas if they're good or not, right? So we really, would ask those, and maybe I'll start with Nidhi. She seems like a great fundraiser. If we can convince more catalytic capital to mobilize, right? And then get involved. We really would suggest everyone to get involved. If you're an investor, we have a circle of investors that we're going to be discussing this investment thesis with and been polishing them. If you're an innovator or know of innovators working in this space, please reach out. We're looking for more startups for the accelerator that Jackson was referring to, Catalyst Fund. And if you actually can fund elements of this overall ecosystem, I'll give you my personal phone number in a heartbeat. So thanks again to everyone, for the panelists to sharing their ideas, and for everybody in the audience for your time and attention. So have a great day, and maybe see some of you at COP26. Bye.
Thank you.